Back to Miller. Oh my goodness.
Herbert.
Sidearm sling, and it's a touchdown.
Tyrese Maxey.
Oh, good spin move by Filipowski for the news. Give him 9.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beef Upfront podcast here on Pick Swap Media. Your host, Ryan Coyle, joined alongside Joe Kmetz for our weekly college basketball preview show, recording a little bit earlier this week on Wednesday night. So some of the teams we're going to be talking about are actually playing tonight, and then obviously some will be playing tomorrow before we get to the weekend. But another big weekend of college basketball coming up where we're really starting to get into conference play now, 5-6 games into the conference play. So some teams are starting to separate from the rest of the pack. Seeding is beginning to be talked about, bubble talk. So, Joe, we're getting to kind of our favorite time of the year. But as always, welcome back, and how are we?
Coyle, I'm fantastic. As always, thank you for having me on the show. And I mean, you said it best. This is the most exciting time of the year. And obviously I am college football first in terms of my sports, but there's nothing that's more exciting because of how many teams can get in the tournament than March Madness in the season leading up to it. We're going to talk probably about a couple of bubble teams. I know we have a game that has huge bubble implications from mid-major conferences. You have teams like McNeese State on Monday night hitting a game winner after being down 15. That's 17-2 right now. And, they obviously are currently leading their conference, but who knows if they somehow get upset in the conference tournament, they could potentially be, a team on the bubble. And that's kind of where there's a little bit more fun than, watching these higher up teams at times, because there's just so much on the line for these teams. Like if we see, the first game we're about to talk about, not to spoil it, is Houston and Kansas State. If Houston gets upset by Kansas State, not the end of the world for Houston. They have plenty of time to bounce back. They'll still be at the top of the Big 12. And the same goes for Kansas State. It obviously means more for Kansas State, but, then you have these other games, these other teams in these mid-major conferences where you lose a game on the road. If you're, say, a Dayton, who we'll talk about later, if Dayton were to have lost to LaSalle last night, all of a sudden Dayton, you take one or two conference losses like that, which happens because it's college basketball, you're in a world of trouble. So, I mean, this is definitely the most exciting time of the year.
Yeah, real exciting slate. And as you said, we'll start in the Big 12 on Saturday, the best conference last year, the best conference this year, and it's really developed into the best conference in college basketball. I think that title used to belong to the ACC, maybe the Big East back in the day, but the Big 12 has really been dominating now. 14 teams are in the conference, and I'm hearing 10 to 11 potential teams could find their way in, which would be pretty wild. But as you said, we start with Kansas State at number 4, Houston, 12 o'clock tip on ESPN. Houston projected to win on Haslam metrics 67-49. So I'd be really surprised if the number actually opens up at this, but that is a 17.5 point spread there, over under 115.5. Kansas State, a team kind of flirting with the bubble, and Houston right now a projected 1 seed, coming off a big win at BYU the other night. So, Joe, what are your thoughts on these teams and who's actually going to win this game on Saturday?
I really like Houston. They have not missed a beat transitioning over to the Big 12 from the American. Obviously, they were the number 1 seed last year. They have talent to be a top 5 team. But, it still was going to be interesting seeing them take a step up in competition. And they have, haven't really had any trouble. Number 4 in the country right now. They're a very good team. And I think they're going to win this game 62-49. I actually like Haslam's 49 there for Kansas State. I will take the Wildcats to cover that 17.5 just because that's a big number, especially for how Houston plays, with their good defense. It's hard for them against these other Power 5 conference opponents to win by that much. If they were playing like Northern Kentucky or whatever, I'd say, yeah, they could win by 17.5. But I think, 17.5 is a little bit too much. Not going to sell my house or anything like that, but I do think it's a little bit too much. So I'll take Kansas State plus 17.5. I'm going to go under 115.5. That's an under that is you want to talk about every shot means something. That would be a crazy under to take, but I'm leaning on the under right now.
Yeah, I'm going to get Houston here outright too, but another game where I would be very surprised if it opens up this big. Like I think by game time, this will be like a 12.5 point type of spread. I will have Houston to cover though if it is at 17.5, or even if it was 12. I'm going to go Houston 65-55 in this one. So K-State plus 17.5 and the over of 115.5. K-State is such a hard team to get a finger on, Joe, because they're so good at home at that octagon of doom. But once you go on the road, things change up a little bit. And this team is definitely less talented than last year with Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel leading the way. So can Kansas State get arguably one of the biggest wins of conference play this year on the road at Houston? I wouldn't put it past them, but do I think it will happen? No. As you said, Houston hasn't really had that big of an adjustment period. They have a couple losses to TCU and Iowa State on the road, but that's life on the road in the Big 12. I don't think that really says much about Houston, more so just about the strength of the conference. So I do expect Houston to protect home court in this one and get the win, but if that number is 17.5, I do think K-State will find a way to stay within that number and cover. All right, second game, we go to the Big East. One of these teams playing right now, or both of them are actually playing tonight, but I got the one over my left shoulder right now with Seton Hall. I think one of the surprise teams in college basketball this year. They're traveling to number 14 Marquette. Seton Hall just won this matchup at Seton Hall a couple of weeks ago. 1 o'clock tip on FS1. Marquette projected to win this one 76-68. So we'll go Marquette minus 7.5, over under 143.5.
Yeah, I'm going to go Marquette to win this game 77-69. So I'm going to take Marquette to cover that 7.5. I'm going to go over 143.5 in this game, just because Marquette, wants their revenge. They went earlier. They lost to Seton Hall this month, a couple weeks ago. I feel like it was January. It was the beginning of January, wasn't it, Coyle?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it was the beginning of January. I knew it was early on in conference play, but I mean, you look at Seton Hall. This is a team that has their biggest wins at home so far. Don't get me wrong. They've gone on the road. They beat Georgetown, Butler on the road recently. They have that win against Providence from earlier in the year. But this is, the upper echelon of the Big East. Marquette is one of the best teams. If, I would say the second best right now. If I had to pick a team, that I can trust the most in the Big East outside of UConn, it would be Marquette. So going to Marquette, especially, with Marquette having a chance to, kind of get their revenge from earlier, I think Marquette will win this game and cover the spread. I think 7.5 is an interesting number. I would still take it, but I do think it is maybe too many points. I wouldn't be surprised if Seton Hall keeps it within that number.
Yeah, I really like this Seton Hall team. I just tweeted it out a little bit ago because I'm watching them right now against Providence, but not the most talented team, like not a very talented squad, but they really play tough and hard. And they're that proverbial team, like you don't want to see Seton Hall if they make it in the tournament because they're a team that'll just go and straight up fuck you up and go win a basketball game. Doesn't matter if it's 90-85 or if it's 50-48. They're going to play and they're going to make sure you're getting hit on every possession, offense, defense, and they're going to make it a battle on both ends of the floor. But I do like Marquette to win this game at home, Joe, 74-70. So we'll take Seton Hall plus 7.5 and the over of 143.5 hitting there. Marquette, I think right behind UConn, I would put them as the second best team in the Big East when they're at their peak, but they're another team that's been struggling a little bit up and down. Can they hit their stride here over the second half of the season and in Big East play as they head to the tournament? Because coming into the year, a team with national title expectations, anything less than I think a trip to at least the Sweet 16 will probably be deemed a failure for this squad with all the returning talent they had. So this is a kind of a get-right spot for them, a revenge type of game, but I do think Seton Hall and their physicality and toughness is able to keep it within that number of 7.5. All right, third game, we go to Hilton Coliseum now with the Iowa State Cyclones hosting here. They're hosting number 7 Kansas. Iowa State comes into this one at number 23. 1:30 tip on CBS. Iowa State projected to win here 76-69. So Iowa State minus 6.5, over under 145.5. I don't remember ever seeing Kansas this big of a dog in a Big 12 game, Joe. Do you think that they can go win this game outright? Because if so, that's some pretty good value if that is the 6.5 point line.
Yeah, I do, because this Kansas team just is one of those teams that makes, like, their inconsistency is crazy to me. And I know they've lost at UCF already. I know they've lost at West Virginia, two teams that are not as good as Iowa State, especially at home. Iowa State, for years, no one wants to go play at Iowa State. But I just feel like this has been a team, they come off that loss to West Virginia. I haven't been on the right side of them. I feel like I thought they were going to win at West Virginia. Then I thought they were going to go and blow Cincinnati out. They only end up winning that game by 5. So I just feel like this is a classic Bill Self spot. Everyone is going to be saying Iowa State. Everyone's, going to be like, oh, Kansas, look at their struggles. blah, blah, blah. I think Kansas is going to go on the road, win a close game. This is going to definitely be a game I want to sit down and watch the entirety of. This is a main TV game for me. I think it's going to be very close, very back and forth. But I think Kansas is going to end up pulling away late. So I'll definitely take them to cover that 6.5 regardless. If that ends up being the spread, that might be sell your house territory because that would be crazy. And I'm going to go with the under 145.5.
Bill Self says if Bill Self is coaching Joe and Kansas is a 6.5-point underdog, I'm taking them with those points every time. But I do think Iowa State's going to win this one at home. Iowa State, I was a little bit skeptical about because they played such a poor non-con, but they've kind of backed it up here during the Big 12 slate. And TCU is another team that has kind of done the same with a few impressive wins in Big 12 play and that really impressive showing at Kansas. But Iowa State at Hilton, they don't call it Hilton Magic for no reason. I think that they're going to find a way to get this one done. And I really am fading hard on this Kansas team long-term stock-wise. I think they really need their five guys, their five main guys to play an almost perfect game against some of these top-level teams to win. And if one of their main guys gets in foul trouble, they're screwed because they're not a very deep team. If Hunter Dickinson's forced to miss time, if DeJuan Harris isn't playing well and forced to miss time with an injury or foul trouble, this team could really not spiral out of control, but they're a team with 1 seed, 2 seed expectations. I wouldn't be surprised to see them struggle in the Big 12 if one of those guys is forced to miss some major time and then eventually fall down the seed line a little bit. And this is a Big 12, as we talked about, 10, 11 teams potentially getting in the tournament. Every single night is from the rest of the way on is going to be a battle. So my piece of advice, don't buy Kansas long-term stock. Don't put a future on them. Maybe if you want to just take them to win the Big 12, go ahead and have some fun with that because you know they're going to win their home games. But long-term, Final Four, NCAA tournament champion, I would say do not buy stock in this Kansas team long-term. I'm not a believer in them. Maybe it'll come back to bite me at the end, but I just am not buying into this Kansas team long-term this year. But I will take Iowa State to win this game, 74-70, but Kansas cover plus 6.5, and the under of 145.5 just hitting there.
Yeah, Coyle,
All right.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but like talking about Kansas, I just took a peek at the rest of their schedule. So starting with February, they have Houston at Kansas State, Baylor at Texas Tech, at Oklahoma, Texas, BYU, Baylor, Kansas State, Houston to finish their last 10 games of the Big 12.
Yeah.
So like you said, definitely wouldn't buy Kansas long-term, especially with every game. You know, Kansas could end up having like 7 or 8 losses and still be considered a really good team. But it's just crazy the back end of their Big 12 schedule. Usually with Kansas, just like with a lot of other good teams in the conference, I feel like their back end is normally a lot lighter. But that's just a crazy back end of their schedule. I just had to point that out.
And I might have missed it, but did you say, are they doing the Big 12 SEC Challenge this year? Is there a game in there or no?
They are not. That was when they played UConn. That's going to be the new thing, the Big 12 Big East, because ESPN with their contracts and stuff, they're going to do the ACC and the SEC now. And then I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years, the Big Ten has something, but as of right now, no.
Because that was always another, big game down the stretch where usually around like this time, maybe next weekend, where they would play like Kentucky or another high-level SEC team. And that's just another tough game to throw in there in the middle of the Big 12 schedule. But we stick in the Big 12 now. It's going to be a pretty common theme throughout the show. But number 20, Texas Tech at number 11, Oklahoma. Oklahoma coming off a tough loss last night at home to Texas. 2 o'clock tip on ESPN Plus. Haslam's projecting a 73-68 Oklahoma win. So we'll go Oklahoma minus 4.5 and over under of 140.5.
Yeah, I'm going Oklahoma here, 77-69. I'll take them to cover that 4.5. I'm going to go with the over 140.5. This is just kind of a blind, like, bounce back spot to me. Oklahoma, they cannot be having, a fun couple days of practice after getting blown out by Texas at home. Their biggest rivals. Porter Moser's definitely having those guys. The next couple of days I feel like are going to be hell leading into this Texas Tech game because, Coyle, like you said, and like we were talking about with Kansas, there are no nights off in the Big 12. You really need to, get every win that you can. And if they lose to Texas Tech, it's kind of the same thing with Kansas. You look at a lot of these teams they have left on their schedule. They really can't afford to take more losses. So I'm going to go Oklahoma here. Texas Tech, I was kind of wrong about. I said I didn't really like them. They ended up beating BYU last Saturday,
Down
But
16 at the half, I believe. And
they were down big. And at first I'm like, oh, like, good. I'm being proven right. I looked at my phone later, saw they came back and won. But I am going Oklahoma just because the fact that this is like a big bounce back spot for me.
Yeah, and also, Joe, when we were talking about there's no nights off in the Big 12, like even going to Oklahoma State, I wouldn't consider a cupcake just because it's still the Big 12. And even like going to West Virginia, Kansas proved on Saturday, you can't just walk in there and get a win either. So there really is, it's not even a cliche, no nights off in the Big 12. It's like when you're in the Big East, you're at least like, oh, I still got Georgetown tonight, or I still got DePaul. The Big 12, even if going to UCF is tough. Cincinnati's towards the bottom of the conference right now, and they're a projected bubble team. So very, very meaningful stakes each and every night in that conference. And we have another game to talk about in that conference now with Texas, who was reeling a little bit, but then they got that big win at the buzzer against Baylor. Then they go to their rival last night in Oklahoma. They get a big-time win there. They're traveling to number 21 BYU, who just lost to Houston last night on Tuesday. 2 o'clock tip on ESPN2, another game where a big spread. I would be very surprised if it opened up at this big of a number, but BYU 82, Texas 68 some projection. So BYU minus 13.5, over under 149.5.
Yeah, we know BYU 81, Texas 78. I'm going to definitely take Texas to cover 13.5. I'm going to go over 149.5. And they kind of talked about, I think it was Jay Billis talking about it when when Baylor went to Texas during that broadcast. This stretch of games, it's Baylor, Oklahoma, they've gone 2-0 so far. Then it's BYU, Houston. At the time, TCU was ranked, but they have to go to Houston, and then they host Iowa State. Massive stretch of games for a team that going into that Baylor game really had no, at-large resume to speak of. I know they were flirting with the top 25. But this is a Texas team that's kind of starting off hot. Really tough to go to BYU, where they're playing a lot better than I expected this year. And in the Big 12, if you get any one of these big name programs, BYU fans just the fact that they get to go watch these games, they're not having to go watch the Portland Pilots. No offense to the Pilots, come in. They get Texas coming to town, and Texas coming off an emotional big rivalry win. This just seems like a letdown spot for them. I'm going to go BYU 81, Texas 78. Keep it close, but I just don't think they'll be able to get it done.
Yeah, and it's got to be a get-right spot for BYU too, because, we've talked about it all show, but it's not like, oh, if you drop this game, you got Mississippi Valley State next game. You probably, I don't know who they have on the top of their head, but you might have Kansas. You might have to go to Kansas next game. So you really do it in the Big 12 especially have to protect your home court. So watching that BYU game a little bit last night when I got home, and they actually have a pretty nice home court advantage. It looked pretty cool there, but Houston is just a little bit of a different animal than them right now. I do think BYU does get right in the spot, but a 13.5 point spread, I don't see them covering that with the way Texas has shown the capability to play over these last 2 games. So I'm going to go with BYU 75, Texas 70. So Texas plus 13.5 and under 149.5. All right, switch up now quick to the ACC. Then we'll be going back to the Big 12. But we got Clemson at number 12, Duke, 4 o'clock on ESPN. Duke projected to win this one 80-75. So Duke minus 4.5, over under is 154.5. I was really high on this Clemson team, Joe. Struggled a little bit in ACC play, but have righted the ship in their last few games, going to a Duke team that just lost at home to Pitt last week. Do you think that there's a chance that they lose another home game here to Clemson, Joe?
I don't think they lose back-to-back home games. That's the one thing. I know it sounds silly, but if this was like a week later, I would be a lot more I wouldn't be shocked. But I think Duke is going to win this game by 10 points, 82-72. I will take them to cover the 4.5, and I'm taking the under 154.5. Just because of the fact I don't think Duke loses back-to-back home games. Even though when they lost to Pitt, that was awesome. I forget the kid's name off the top of my head, but jumping on the table, you have all the Cameron crazies flipping them off. It was great. But I think that environment is going to be insane this weekend. I think Duke is going to bounce back. I think it's going to be one of those games that they only end up winning by 10, but it feels like they win by like 30 or 40. Because Clemson, they have righted the ship, Coyle, but I do not think they're on the level of Duke. This will please Ryan Patrick Young, and I'm going to go Duke by 10.
I'm going to go Duke by 9, and I'm going to have the over. I do think this one is a bit of a track meet style game. I'll go 84-75 Duke wins. So Duke also covers the 4.5. I'm going to go over 154.5. As I touched on several times throughout the college basketball season so far, I do like this Clemson team. And I think if they're able to kind of right the ship through some adversity, because it seems like over the past 5 or 6 years with Clemson, where they've started out strong and had a good non-con, they've hit a bit of a wall come conference play and they folded. If they can kind of just right the ship and battle some of this adversity and come out of it a little bit stronger, I think that's going to actually really help them long term. They might not get the best seed in the tournament, but on any given day, they have a starting 5 that can go out there and play with most groups in the country. So I'm still high on this Clemson team long term. Hope to see them find a way into the tournament because they're a team. I wouldn't be surprised if they were an 8 or 9 that found their way into a second weekend, or a 7 or 10 seed that found their way into the second weekend. But I do think Duke's going to find a way to get this one done at home. I'm more so on the fence, Joe, that this is going to be a close one throughout, and Duke kind of makes them pay down the stretch with some free throws. So I think Duke's going to win this one outright and cover the spread, and we're going to hit the over as well. All right, back to the Big 12. We got 4 games left to cover. TCU at number 15, Baylor, 4 o'clock tip, ESPN2. Baylor projected to win this one, only 75-72. So Baylor minus 2.5, over under 146.5. One of our closer spreads so far the weekend. But, Joe, do you like the Bears to get this one done at home?
I do. I believe they're going to win 81-76, so I will take the over. I'm going to take Baylor to cover the 2.5 at home. This is a TCU team that I've kind of been saying it all season long whenever they've been on the show. Their non-conference is kind of coming back to get them right now. You know, they have a couple of big home wins with Oklahoma and Houston, but then they go on the road and lose to Cincinnati. They, lose to Iowa State at home. They only beat Oklahoma State by 5. And, I know Oklahoma State, like you were saying, still has a good home environment, but Oklahoma State is not the best team in the world. They're definitely not going to be a tournament team unless they somehow make a run and win the Big 12. TCU is just feels like a yo-yo team to me. They're 3-3 in the Big 12 right now, and it wouldn't shock me if they ended up going 10-10 or 9-9 or however many games they play. Right around that 500. And TCU feels like one of those teams that could be like a 10 seed in the tournament this year. Maybe even if they finish a little bit below 500, wouldn't be shocked to see them in that first 4 game. Just because that non-conference really is not going to help them late in the season. I think they're going to lose at Baylor. Baylor is a very good team. Worst camera angle in America, but they're a very good team at home. I'm going to take Baylor. Don't overthink it. Baylor minus 2.5.
Yeah, if the total in this Baylor TCU game comes in at over 146.5, that's my favorite over of the week. TCU plays at one of the fastest paces in the country, and Baylor is a team that has a bunch of guards that can go out there and flat out score the basketball. I think this one is a pure up and down track meet. First one to 85, 90 points potentially wins this game. I'm going to go Baylor winning it, though, 85-78. So I'll go Baylor minus 2.5 and over 146.5. Another game where I'd be surprised if the line only opened at minus 2.5. I think it could be more of a 4.5, 5-point type of line here. But I really love the over in this Baylor TCU game. I think we see one of the more fun and entertaining games of the day on Saturday. If this one is 146.5, I really like the over in that game. All right, we go out to the Mountain West now, Joe. If you want to tune into this one, you got to get onto your Mountain West Network subscription, which I know you have queued up, probably ready to go tonight for New Mexico and San Jose State. I think will be on there. But number 18, Utah State traveling to Boise State. Last week's dog of the day for a 4 o'clock game on Saturday. Boise State projected to win here 73-71. So Boise State minus 1.5, over under 143.5 to the Broncos protect home court here.
Yeah, I think they will. I'm going to go Boise State 77, Utah State 74. So I'm going to take Boise to cover the minus 1.5. I'm going to go over 143.5. Yeah, over 143.5. I saw Boise State play last week. Watched the full game. Shout out CBS for putting them on the main channel. That was great. Really good game against San Diego State. Utah State's a very good basketball team. Do not get me wrong, but going to Boise, that home crowd, is electric. That fan base cares about its, sports. Like the whole city of Boise gets into it. Whole state of Idaho gets into it. You saw it with during football season. They show up during basketball season. They're not like, oh, we're a football school that only show up for big games. They show up for Boise State. And Utah State coming off a massive win against Fresno on Saturday. They won like 21 points. Massive, and more so the scoring margin. Fresno State isn't great, but having to go on the road, 17-2. I feel like I was alluding to it earlier with these smaller conferences. Even though the Mountain West in recent years has definitely grown in its popularity, and the skill of the conference, but this just seems like such a spot for Utah State to go on the road and lose, and everyone could be like, oh my god, look at it, look at this big upset. But in reality, Boise State's a great basketball team, and I'm going to ride my Broncos, and I'm going to pick them if they make the tournament round one, no matter what. Blind pick Boise State.
All right. Well, that's a pretty big conviction there. The reason why I really liked Boise State last week against San Diego State was because Boise State had a 22-game home winning streak that was snapped. So going into that San Diego State game, you knew that they were looking to restart that streak back up. And it's really proven to be not just one of the best mid-major home court advantages in the country, but that was the longest home court winning streak in the entire nation. So they've shown over a nice period of time now that they're a very dominant team at home, and I look for them to continue to do that this week. If they're -1.5, I love them in that spot. But wouldn't also be surprised if Utah State with the number next to their name finds himself favored in that matchup. So I do like Boise State to win this one at home. I'll give 72-68, so Boise State -1.5, and the under of 143.5. All right, 2 games left. Joe, the one complaint I have about the schedule this week, 10 games that we're talking about, 10 big games, and our final 2 games are at 5:30 and 6. It's kind of weird, especially with no football on Saturday. Not a great balance. But number 9, Arizona at Oregon, who has, once again, slow start kind of plagued them, and now they're figuring it out. They're hovering around the bubble, as it seems like Oregon is most years. But that's a 5:30 tip on Fox. Arizona to projected 83-75 win. So Arizona -7.5, over under 157.5. Joe, Oregon or Arizona in this game?
I'm going Arizona here. I'm going to actually take them to cover that 7.5. I'm going to take them 81-73. I'm going under 157.5, though. I feel like it's just a lot of points. Simply because the Pac-12, like looking at it from top to bottom, is really down this year. Arizona is the only team in the top 25. Oregon right now, if the conference tournament was today, would be the 2 seed. In a 3-way tie with both the Arizona schools at 5-2 right now. But you look really at the Big 12, excuse me, the Pac-12, not the greatest conference in the world. I'm just going to kind of blindly take Arizona, even though they already have 2 Pac-12 losses. They struggled against UCLA. Oregon coming off of 2 straight Pac-12 losses. Normally, I feel like this would be a big bounce back spot at home. I don't know. They play tomorrow night at home against Arizona State. There's just something, in my bones telling me not to take Oregon, so I'm going to take Arizona here.
I'm going to go with the upset here, Joe. I'm going to take Oregon. Arizona has proven under Tommy Lloyd to be, especially in conference play, a very different team away from their building. This is Oregon's biggest game of the year, and Arizona looking like really the only lock right now out of the Pac-12 to make the tournament. I think Oregon and Washington State potentially and Utah are going to be teams that are going to be, competing for one of those final spots in the tournament, and Oregon getting a big time win over Arizona here would certainly be a boost to their resume. Dana Altman, one of the best and more underrated coaches, I think, in the entire country. I think he finds a way to potentially out-coach Tommy Lloyd in this spot, and Oregon gets the outright win. I don't know if I'll bet the money line, but I'm definitely going to bet the 7.5 if that is the case. I do like Oregon 79, Arizona 75. So Oregon plus 7.5 and the under of 157.5. If this game is won by Oregon, I think it's going to have to go under because I don't know if Oregon can win a track meet against this Arizona team. All right, final game. I believe we haven't talked about these guys on the show yet. It's an A-10 matchup with number 16 Dayton traveling to Richmond. 6 o'clock tip on CBS Sports Network. Dayton projected to win this one on the road here. 67-64, so Dayton -2.5, over under 130.5. Joe, Dayton and Richmond both undefeated in conference play. Dayton at 6-0, Richmond at 5-0. So winner of this game, Joe, despite how good Dayton's been, if Richmond wins this game, Dayton could fall into second place in the conference. So Richmond, Dayton, who you got in this one?
I'm going with the upset here. I'm going to go Richmond to win this game, 67-64. Going to take over 130.5. I kind of just reversed the score there for Haslam. I'm going to take Richmond plus the 2.5 at home. This is, I kind of just said it with Utah State, Boise State. This is just a big trap spot. Dayton having to go to LaSalle Tuesday. Now you go to Richmond on Saturday. And Richmond, the one thing about their basketball team, especially with these big A-10 games, Dayton is kind of turning into one of those programs in that conference that it's like the biggest game every year. I think it's going to be a very good crowd, especially now that all the schools are back in session. I feel like the students are going to really, pack this in a night game. 6 o'clock too is such a good time because the game ends at 8. You still have the whole night ahead of you as a student. I think Richmond's going to get this done at home. And also, their team right now, looking at the net rankings, which, say what you want about them, but the committee does look at it pretty heavily when picking teams. Dayton. Richmond is currently sitting at 78th right now. Not great, but, when you talk about bubble teams, they're kind of right in that, the back of the bubble category right now where, they wouldn't be in today. But if they win a couple, get hot, I could see them making a run at the bubble. And winning this game against a Dayton team that I believe is currently, I saw 15th, 14th right now in the net rankings. This could be a huge boost for their at-large resume. 13-5. They were 5-5 at one point. Richmond kind of looked dead in the water. They've rattled off 8 straight wins. Big 2-game stretch here for Richmond, as I believe they are currently playing George Washington, who is third, or they're 14-4. They're so not third in the conference, but they're 14-4. So big 2-game stretch for Richmond. I do think they get it done against Dayton at home.
I'm taking Richmond with the upset in this one too, Joe. I'm going to go 67-64. So Richmond winning outright, covering that plus 2.5 in the over of 130.5 hitting. Richmond too, Joe, one of the best teams in the country against the spread. 13-4-1 against the spread this year. You're giving me Richmond, their Super Bowl pretty much with Dayton, the ranked team coming to town. Huge game down there. I like the Spiders to go out there and win this one outright and get a big-time win and enhance that resume of potentially being an at-large team come tournament time. But that'll do it for this episode of the College Basketball Weekend. Little look ahead and preview, talking some big picture stuff, as well as the 10 main games on the card this weekend. We also got Georgetown Providence. We didn't really touch on that with the return of Ed Cooley, but that'll be a cool one to see. Obviously not that big of a game with the way Georgetown's been playing, but still that'll be one that a lot of eyeballs are on this weekend too. But any last comments, show before we head out?
Everyone enjoy the weekend. Good show, Coyle. Thank you for having me on once again. So have a great college basketball weekend.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk next week.